Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, Ad Nauseam listeners, to episode 126. My name is Dr. David C. Noe. I am here in the bunker, Vomitorium South, with my good friend and fabulous co-host, Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. How are you this evening, Jeff?
I'm feeling good, but I'm feeling a little out of sorts because it feels like it's been a bit of time since we've been together down here.
3 weeks, maybe?
3 weeks.
2 to 3 weeks?
Yeah.
People were probably beginning to wonder, hoping that this little show was done.
Maybe exactly right. People are kind of abandoning ship and said,
finally, they gave it up.
Right, but no, we are back.
We're back.
Yeah, but I'm feeling good.
Yeah,
I'm feeling ready.
It's good to renew our friendship, renew our classics as a way of life. Mm-hmm. The vibe that we're on.
That's right. And how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
Yes.
Yeah. It's been a good day. Got into the Gaim a little bit.
Very good.
Yes, moved some iron around.
Excellent, as did I.
You did?
I did.
All right.
Yeah. And you've been on the road, though.
I have been traveling quite a bit.
Yeah. I know that you did a local, you did like a week, it was a spoken Latin week.
Well, it wasn't all spoken.
Okay.
Actually, it was a lot of English.
Okay.
Some speaking. It was the Colloquium Latinum Aestium, the summer Latin colloquium.
Yep.
Part 2. And this took place at Quilted Crossings.
Quilted Crossings.
Yes.
What is that?
Well, my friends Kevin and Laura, they own this fabulous place out in Woodland, Michigan, where people go to quilt.
Do they really?
Yes, there's a lot of quilters here in the Midwest.
Did you have to step over quilters on your way to the colloquium?
No. We reserved it.
Okay, all right.
We turned the Quilted Crossings into a Latin designated area, and for a week.
And everybody kind of lived and ate together?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, 12 individuals in this house.
Yeah.
I and the hospitality staff, which is Mrs. Noe and our daughter, lived off-site, but we had 12 individuals there, scholars, pastors, Latin teachers from around the country.
Fantastic.
I'd like to talk about it a little bit, if I may.
Please do.
Okay,
yeah.
So we had one individual come from Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
Another from Stanford, California. One from Texas, I think 3 from Illinois, a couple from 4 from North Carolina. We had one from Maryland. It was just a tremendous Alabama.
That's
a tremendous cross-section of really fine scholars who got together to read Latin and study. So we had Barbara and Kara and Ruth and Joan and Tyson and Marty and Douglas and Douglas and Caroline and just a whole host of folks.
That sounds fantastic. Were there any Michiganders there besides yourself? Was it all out-of-staters?
I think there was not a single Michigander.
That is really cool.
Would you like to know what we read?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So on Monday we read Lucius Aeneas Seneca, his Ad Marcium de Consolatione, his consolation to Marcia. Interesting Latin. And we spent a day with Seneca, kind of his pointed style, not Ciceronian, but always striving for effect and juxtaposition of interesting constructions and styles.
Yeah.
The second day, Tuesday, we read from Lactantius. So this guy is from early 4th century. We read his Epitome Divinarum Institutionum, so his summary or epitome of his divine institutes.
Okay.
All right, so really interesting. Lactantius, I'll be brief. He wrote the Divine Institutes in 7 books, and it was a success. But his brother, probably not his actual brother, but a fellow Christian, a guy named Pentadius, said, Lactantius, your book is great, but it's way too long.
So he wanted the Cliff's Notes?
That's right.
Okay.
So Lactantius said, okay, fine. And then he wrote this Epitome.
All right.
And
all right.
Just some beautiful Ciceronian Latin. Lactantius was called the Cicero Christianus during the Renaissance because he had such beautiful Latin.
All right. Okay.
And Wednesday, we moved on to a Bernard of Clairvaux, or Bernie, as his friends called him. So we didn't have an entire weekend with Bernie, but we had a Wednesday.
A Wednesday with Bernie.
That's correct. And we read his De Diligendo Deo on loving God, which is just a fabulous work of 12th century Latin, quite good Latin.
Okay.
Thursday, we move on to Erasmus, De Pueris Instituendis, on the instruction of children. Now, Erasmus is the only individual that made an appearance in both years. So we had him in the 2022 colloquium. We brought him back for 2023, and he did not disappoint.
So he was back by popular demand.
That's correct.
Okay.
Desiderius, his first name,
Desi.
Yeah, Desi, or how would we translate that? Wanty? Something like
yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah.
And he's a big hit. And
very cool.
Then on Friday, we capped it off with Theodore Beza, a work of a kind of catechetical nature, and just a great time. So the folks that came together, they're just some top-flight Latin students. Again, some are pastors, some are actually quite famous scholars, and some are Latin teachers, and we had meals together. Now, the funny thing, Jeff, was that I took the Ratio 8 to the site, the one with the oyster color and the walnut accents and so forth.
And the hulking flagon?
Well, the funny thing is that Mrs. Noe said, that's a great machine, but is it going to be able to produce enough coffee for 13 individuals?
That's an excellent question.
It is. I said, well, I don't know, but I got to take it because it's going to be a hit.
Yes.
And it was a little bit unnerving. This one individual, we'll just call him Tyson because that's his name.
Yes.
I'm setting up the coffee. He says, wait a minute. Is that the Ratio 8? I said, yeah. He said, and is that the hulking flagon? I said, yes, Tyson, it is. And is that the Fibonacci head? And are those the metallic? And it was as though he had listened to all these episodes.
Yes.
And wow.
So he was in awe of the object.
He was.
Yes.
And it's famous, kind of. And it was a little unnerving, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking, what have we been doing 126 episodes?
That's hysterical.
It was a great hit, and people loved it.
Wait, I guess you do multiple pots.
Oh, the thing was running around the clock.
I imagine, yes.
And we had a second, sorry, Mark, not Ratio, a second squirty plastic machine going because as intense as the Latin study was, people needed a lot of coffee to keep them going.
I can imagine.
But we had adult beverages, we had soft drinks, we had delicious food. It was just a fantastically good time.
So I'm assuming there's going to be a part 3.
I think so. Yeah, we're going to plan it for 2024.
So our listeners, you'll have to keep them apprised when this is coming, and
or I could just let them know and inform them.
Or that.
Okay.
Right.
You want me to apprise them?
I keep them up to date.
We don't give out prizes.
Right.
So
now the list of authors there.
Right.
My chronology always gets fuzzy. Anything after Constantine.
Yeah.
But were you going chronologically?
Yes, that was the plan.
Gotcha.
Sequential. The idea is Latin is Latin from whatever era.
Yes.
There are some differences, and I'm very thankful for Erasmus and Valla and Petrarch and the guys that brought back good Latin style during the Renaissance.
Yeah.
But Bernard of Clairvaux, he was called Doctor Mellifluous.
Really?
The honey-flowing doctor.
It sounds like he should have been a DJ.
That's good, isn't it?
That's not bad.
Because he has such great style.
Wow.
And, we had fires in the evening, and the weather was perfect. You know that it's been a little bit hot. But
it has been, yeah.
For that particular week, July 17 through 21, zero humidity.
Yeah.
Nice, cool evenings.
So with these fires in the hearth or outside?
Outside, around the fire pit.
Nice.
And we just had a great time.
That sounds fantastic.
And the hospitality crew, Mrs. Noe and our daughter, they just did great.
They came through?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a good time.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, yeah, we'll have to keep our listeners aware of when the next one's coming around. Right. So, but I mean, if you're going back to the same place, space is limited.
Well, we could only fit 12.
Yeah.
I think there's enough demand. I don't know. I could probably do 2 weeks in a row, but I just, I have other things to do.
Yes. Indeed.
Speaking of other things to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went out to Kansas.
Oh, that's right. You've been everywhere. Okay.
Well,
so what were you doing down there?
Okay. So kind of a preliminary shout out. We have a real one coming up, but a preliminary shout out to the folks at the Classical School of Wichita.
Okay.
So Wichita, Kansas. My geography is only slightly better than it was before I went there. Mm-hmm. But Wichita is, I guess, about an hour from the Oklahoma border, 45 minutes.
Okay.
More or less, if you picture Kansas as like a big rectangle, Wichita is more or less in the center and on the bottom.
Okay.
So not too far from Oklahoma. So they invited me to come out and do a teacher in-service. So I flew out on Wednesday, and on Thursday Spent the whole day teaching Greek, Moss method, to some fabulous students, Evan and Ben and Justin. And then on Friday, spent the whole day teaching Latin to just some additional fantastic students.
Excellent.
To Jordan and Melissa and Kenna and they showed me fantastic hospitality. They wanted to meet you, Jeff.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Fans of the podcast. They were asking lots of questions, and when coffee was served, they would say things like, "We're a little ashamed to serve you this coffee when we know you only drink from the ratio 8." And again, it was kind of it was kind of unnerving to realize just that people are actually listening.
That's great. Well, maybe next year I could come down and just kind of hang around.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the interesting one that provides the comic relief. Let's be honest.
Okay, all right, I'll accept that.
All right. Then I got back. All my flights were on time. Thankfully, never happens.
Wow.
And rolled into Grand Rapids late Friday evening and was ready to go.
Man,
but what have you been up to?
Boy, nothing like that travel schedule.
Well, but I mean, interesting things. You took some family time away.
Family time, yeah. We, my family and I spent an annual week up north, as they say here in Michigan, and so we were in a town called Onekama. Which is
what is that again?
Onekama. Which is, have you seen these, like, people will put these stickers on their car with initials so they get into the outer banks. OBX, right? So there's one for Onekama. There's the number 1 with a comma, because when you look at the name, it looks like 1 comma.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I'm not a big fan.
Did you get a couple of those to put on the back of your family wagon?
I find them. I don't know. There's something off-putting about them, right? But Onekama is beautiful. We had this cottage right on Lake Michigan on the dunes, and so lots of hiking and swimming and cooking and fires. It was great.
Shark-free waters.
Shark-free, salt-free
is how Lake Michigan bills itself.
Exactly.
They don't mention the giant chunks of ice still floating from the previous winter.
It was actually very temperate.
What?
We were jumping off the pier into deep waters. It was wonderful.
Really?
Yes.
And you are the you're the chef for these events, aren't you? You do all the cooking.
It's part of the deal.
A man of many talents. So what was on the menu?
We did some Greek food. We did some souvlaki with tzatziki and roast vegetables, briam.
Wow.
We did some Indian curries. We did also just kind of classic burgers and brats, homemade pizza.
Right.
Taco night.
Right.
And the place that we rent has a big kitchen with a big island.
Nice.
So it's a really fun place to cook.
Nice.
Yeah.
So it's at this. That's really interesting. It's at this point in the podcast where the listeners usually say, "Come on already!
Yeah.
We're tired of hearing about your trip to Kansas and what you're serving and so forth. Get out of the classics."
Yeah.
But no,
we're
going to make them wait a little bit longer.
Okay.
Did you serve any tomatoes during this past week?
Yes, there were. Because some roast tomatoes.
I have a little bit here.
Okay.
And no one's ever found it funny, but I'm going to inflict it on you.
All right.
And we'll see where it goes.
All right, drop it.
Okay, so when we were kids, there were not really cherry tomatoes. Do you remember when the cherry tomato craze first hit?
I don't remember.
It was along about the same time, maybe mid-'80s, as the salad bar craze.
Okay.
These places around here were offering the all-you-can-eat salad bar.
Yeah, okay.
You remember that?
I remember that, yeah.
Okay, so then all of a sudden, in these little silos down among the ice cubes, there's cherry tomatoes.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal. Don't you think that was a big deal?
I'm sure it was.
I'd never seen a tomato that size.
I'm sure people that were wandering through the produce aisle that do most of the shopping say, "Hey, what is this?"
Exactly. And then do you remember after, here's the bit, they introduced grape tomatoes.
Yes.
And I was thinking, grape tomatoes?
Yeah.
Right? What are the scientists up to? Are we headed next toward like poppy seed tomatoes?
That's got to be. I mean, they keep getting smaller.
Smaller, and finally it'll just be a can of aerosolized tomatoes. They'll just spray them at us.
A tomato mist.
Yes. No one's ever found that funny.
I like it.
Okay.
I like it, right.
Yeah, you're a good friend. I just kind of float that out there. How small must a tomato be before I will ingest it?
Exactly.
You
But
know?
what I never understood is, so we've got the cherry.
Right.
The grape, it's slightly more oblong.
And it's only a little bit smaller than a cherry.
Why would you choose one over the other?
I don't know. I guess they have a slightly different taste.
I've bought them both, but it was never like, I got to get the cherries.
And then there are those yellow pear-shaped tomatoes. They call them pear tomatoes. Have you seen those?
They're actually called pear tomatoes.
Yes, they are.
I've seen them. I didn't know.
Because they're that kind of pear shape. So where does it end? Right? We're going to get banana tomato. You got to peel it yourself. Come on.
Come on. Exactly. Right.
All right. Well, that's the bit. Let's get back to classics.
All right. So, hey, Dave, what are we talking about tonight?
Well, we have an actual shout out.
Oh, we do. Okay.
Yes, we do.
All right.
So you're going to have to read a little bit of this, please, because some of it is complimentary to me.
Oh.
And
you feel uncomfortable reading this about yourself? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Well, I'm comfortable hearing it. I'm uncomfortable reading it, but here we go. My name is Tyler Eaton. Currently, I am beginning the senior year of my undergraduate studies at Reformation Bible College. This is in Orlando. By God's grace, says Tyler, I aim to earn an MDiv and further my education in postgraduate studies in the English and Scottish Reformers. Now, you're going to have to read the next part, please.
While at RBC, I had the opportunity and privilege to study for a semester under Dr. Noe. Oh, so this is somebody
That's
you
me.
know.
Yep.
And consequently discovered the Ad Nauseam podcast. I mean this without any sense of false flattery. This podcast is excellent. It has helped broaden my knowledge and has instilled a newfound pleasure in the classics.
We like that.
Yes, we do. Not only are the classics filled with great stories and impressive rhetorical skills, but they illuminate the nature of the human soul, his longings, wants, fears, and desires.
Hold on now.
Yes.
We have to take Tyler to task for a minute.
Okay.
Did you catch the pronoun there?
Which one? His?
Yes. Illuminate the nature of the human soul. His longings, wants, fears, and desires. Now, Tyler.
Yes.
Well, you're Jeff, but...
Yeah, you're talking to Tyler.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
The soul has typically been treated as feminine, right?
Right.
Typically, there's a feminine pronoun. So I don't know if Tyler is referring to himself when he says his longings, wants, fears, and desires. But if he's referring to the soul, we got to go pedantic on it.
Right.
And we should say her longings, wants, fears, and desires.
Right. Although I would say that if most people were writing the same passage, they would say its longings.
Oh, you're right, because the soul has been depersonalized.
Right. Yes.
Right. Anyway, we'll keep going.
Okay. Tyler continues. These characteristics make the classics a helpful tool in my studies, and this podcast further aids that tool.
Very nice. In a world of brackish tang, says Tyler, the Ad Nauseam podcast is a delightful combination of precision brewing and top quality construction designed to elevate the classical podcast experience.
Nicely done there. Right?
That's good.
I like the idea that the world... it's a dangerous trap full of brackish tang.
Yeah, so you got to kind of wade through it to the real stuff.
It's exactly right.
Tyler did a good job. Tyler, we're so thankful for all your kind words and that you're listening out there. We appreciate it.
Yes, we do.
And keep the torch of classics alive. So, Jeff, at long last, when the podcast is 3/4 over, tonight we are talking about the Homeric hymn to Demeter.
Demeter, yeah. So, our hope is we'll do a few episodes on the Eleusinian mysteries, right? And more on that later. But it's widely accepted that this roughly 500 line long poem is in some ways kind of a source text for the institution of this famous religious practice.
Okay.
And so I thought we would spend an episode or two talking about this poem,
right,
and breaking it down.
Okay.
Yep.
So the Eleusinian mysteries, are we going to say Demeter or Demeter?
We should decide.
We should, because otherwise we'll go back and forth and annoy people.
Yeah,
more than normal.
I find when I teach myth, I find myself going back and forth, and I annoy myself.
Right.
Do you have a preference? Demeter?
I stick with Demeter.
Demeter's kind of my default.
Probably Demeter's the default.
Should we go with that? Demeter.
Yeah. So we're going to go with Demeter.
All right.
So Eleusis is north and a little bit west of Athens.
Yes.
Not even a 20-minute drive.
Just right around the bend on the coast there.
Yep. And you were there quite recently. Was it April or May?
April. Yep.
Okay.
And doing a photography project, which maybe we get into the later episodes of the series, I'll talk more about.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Eleusis was holy, right? Was sacred to Demeter.
Yes.
And so we need to talk a little bit about the site and about the poem. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
And you have the opening quote.
I do.
And we hope that the people like it.
Yes. So this comes from an article entitled Athens, Eleusis, and the Homeric Hymn to Demeter by one Francis...
Whoa.
Did I already break it?
You said Demeter.
Sorry. The Homeric Hymn to Demeter.
There we go.
This is going to be a problem. By one Francis R. Walton. And this comes from the Harvard Theological Review way back in April of 1952. And Francis writes, the Homeric hymn to Demeter is the earliest and, for us, the single most important literary record of the Eleusinian mysteries. These mysteries were, for 1,000 years, one of the crowning glories of Athens, the pride of her statesmen, poets, and orators, a focal point of piety, which, though intimately civic, was at the same time pan-Hellenic. The constant references to the cult in both prose and poetry attest its popularity and singular importance. Yet it remains a curious fact that in all Athenian literature, at least until Hellenistic times, there is no direct mention of the Homeric hymn, and scarcely anything which can be reasonably identified even as a reminiscence or echo of it. Apparently the hymn was allowed to fall into almost total oblivion. Why this should have happened is a question that seems to merit some consideration. By the very nature of the problem, the evidence is inadequate to assure definite conclusions, but it is hoped that the solution proposed, though necessarily tentative, may add somewhat to our understanding of an obscure but interesting period in the religious history of Athens. So one of the
So can you unpack that for us a little bit, Jeff?
So one of the many questions about the Eleusinian mysteries is, to what degree did this hymn play a role in its worship, in its rituals, and kind of in just the knowledge of it by the initiates?
Okay.
And because there are some things, I don't know if we'll get to them today, but there are some elements in the story where it seems, okay, clearly some ritual things are being laid out.
Right.
And others have said, there's a lot of things in that poem, or I should say there's a lot of things in the rituals that we know about, certain figures, certain gods and goddesses that aren't mentioned at all.
Right.
And so
the question is it simply a literary production?
Yes.
Or is it a liturgy of some kind used in the actual worship of the goddess there?
Exactly. And at the end of the day, we don't really know.
Okay. Right. So now we're not going to devote a whole episode to the concept of mystery religions.
No.
We did an episode on one of the mystery religions before.
Yes.
That was the cult of Mithras.
Yes.
In the episode entitled "We Bowled This City."
Yeah,
that was you.
That was, and I'm still shaking my head about that. Yeah.
Okay.
That was episode 41. If
did you look it up?
Back. I did.
Okay.
Yep.
But we should probably give the briefest definition for folks out there so that they can understand, in case they don't already, the difference between a mystery religion and the more mundane vanilla religion, which we assume was practiced in all of the Greek city-states.
Right. Okay, yeah. So if I may paint with a very large brush.
Please.
So the public cults, which were conducted on behalf of the people by the priests at the temple, under the aegis of the patron deity.
So in Athens, it's Athena, obviously.
In these kind of public celebrations, there was very little mystery about what was going on. The god was being appeased through sacrifice. There was very little for the populace to do by way of conducting rituals or prayers. You might offer a token or maybe a small statue at the temple.
You might participate in the procession, right? The Panathenaic procession,
right?
But the actual cult worship, you would probably be more of a spectator,
yes,
while the priests did the cutting and the butchering and the burning and so forth.
Exactly, right. And it was all public. And we don't really know to what degree did the public really understand what was going on, but they understood that's in the hands of the priests, and there's very little for us to do along those lines. They didn't have to.
And there's also then the question of, did they have an actual kind of faith in the terms that we might use?
Exactly. Right.
So as a Christian, I believe in a triune God. I have a relationship that I cultivate with him through prayers and attendance on worship. You could be a member of, if you were a member of the city of Athens, you were de facto a worshiper of Athena.
Right.
And we don't know whether that meant you had any kinds of feelings towards Athena,
right,
that we might associate with one of the monotheistic religions today.
Yeah. An analog that I often, what this makes me think of is, if you go to Italy today, every Italian that you meet will very likely, if you were to ask them, what religion you are, well, I'm Roman Catholic, of course. But church attendance in Italy is famously very, very low, right? And so everybody's a Catholic by just simply the fact that they're Italian. And so I think a similar kind of thing too is like, you are a believer or worshiper of Athena simply because you are an Athenian, not because of anything that you do on a day-to-day or weekly basis.
Right. I was looking up some statistics today. 90% of those in Greece today describe themselves as Orthodox.
Yeah.
But church attendance on Sunday worship is really, really quite low.
It's very low. And the people that you do find there are the very, very old.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have talked about this a little bit before. We have quoted from this book, Personal Religion Among the Greeks by André Jean Festugière. And so that's a good source if people want to check that out.
Yeah, great book.
So we've got the civic religion, but then the mystery religions, Mithras, the Dionysiac cult, and the one for today of Demeter and the Eleusinian mysteries. How would they differ, Jeff?
It's kind of a shift from the public to the private. So if you accept, as I certainly do, that human beings kind of are born with kind of instilled kind of longing for transcendence, right? What Augustine called the God-shaped hole.
Right.
You can imagine that the public cult, where there was very little for you to do as a citizen, spiritually speaking, would be very unsatisfying.
Right.
Right.
So far as we know, there was a kind of distance between the individual and the deity who was being honored in the ritual.
Exactly. So if you think about a story like the Odyssey, Athena's attention to Odysseus, that's the exception, right? That's not the rule, right? And I think that the Greeks kind of understood that. That's one of the things that made it extraordinary, that this goddess had this attention to this one individual.
Right.
It wasn't kind of the promise like, well, if you grow up to be an Odysseus, she'll watch out for you too.
Right.
No. So my sense is that the public cult kind of left this vacuum, and that's where these mystery cults came in, and they promised a kind of a private, secret, initiatory experience that was going to cost you something, certainly in terms of time. The Eleusinian mysteries, and as we'll see, just like with Mithras, they're still very mysterious. We don't know a lot, but by all accounts, such as they are, they suggest that going through the mysteries was difficult.
Right.
It was terrifying. It was draining. It was exhausting. And so these things...
It was a multiple day event,
right? So it cost you time. It cost you money.
Right.
It was emotional. It was psychologically draining.
A little bit like going to Disney World?
Yeah, exactly right. Yes, but with hopefully some sort of enlightenment on the other end. Right? The enlightenment being, I'm never going to do that again. Yeah. And so... And so these mystery cults kind of offered something very, very personal.
Yeah.
And unlike the Odysseus Athena example, this said you can be any Joe, Jane, Doe Athenian,
right? And
if you go through this ritual, this goddess is now looking out for you. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be the extraordinary one.
And what they had in common, at least the three we mentioned, seems to be they dealt with the question of death and rebirth.
Yes.
And the notion of personal salvation.
Right.
Was there some way to square, the trouble in the world, the feelings of isolation and loneliness and misery that I think just about everybody feels at some point, and some people feel a lot.
Yeah.
Is there some way to overcome that?
Right.
And these seem to offer a hope of that kind of possibility.
Yes, indeed. So if you look at the mystery cults that we know a little something about, Isis, Dionysus, Cybele, Mithras, Demeter, the goddess of Samothrace, they all seem to have something in common where the central deity undergoes some kind of death and resurrection experience, be it metaphorical, allegorical. So like if Mithras, he kills the bull, which some people think represents death,
right?
And then feeding on the carcass of the bull, you come back to life. But the story we're going to be talking about with Demeter and Persephone has in this Homeric hymn has the clearest narrative of that kind of death and resurrection, where Persephone she literally marries death, and then annually goes down to death and returns.
Right.
And so she finds a way to go to death and to get beyond it.
And we should say that by Roman times, many upper-class Romans got themselves initiated into these various mystery religions, almost as a kind of tourism.
Yes, indeed.
So there's the Disney World connection.
Exactly
right. You go to Athens and you see the library, you listen to some philosophers, you get some tzatziki or some gelato, you get yourself initiated and you go back to Rome.
Exactly right. And it was boosted by...
and they do have gelato in Greece, I just want to make that point clear.
Yes, they do. They have very good gelato
Absolutely.
in Greece. Yes, exactly. And it was boosted by emperors like Hadrian, who was a big believer in the mystery cults. In fact, having just been at Eleusis, every plaque I read reminded me that most of what you see there were refurbishments done by Hadrian in the 2nd century. And so, you had the face of the emperor stamped on these places and saying, this is good.
There was a huge pile of Amazon packages on Hadrian's front porch, on his steps, right?
Yes.
He was tearing open packages. I got to refurbish this. I got to refurbish that.
Yeah.
And redid the entire site of Eleusis.
He did, amongst many other places as well. And he was a huge Phi-Hellene too.
Yes, he was. And I think it was at Eleusis that we famously heard that remark of that dear young lady on our 2011 trip.
Was the one she was complaining about?
If I see another old stone, I'm going to puke.
That's right. That was Eleusis.
Now, in her defense, it was kind of near the end of the trip, and okay,
exactly,
understandable. She had been a good sport.
But it's one of those things that I think at some level, you either find kind of a haunting beauty in it, or you just say, just show me something intact already.
Enough, right?
Yeah, so that's where we're going with this. And so I would add one more thing is that these death and resurrection motifs are not always in the mystery cults, but they're often tied to the cycle of the seasons, right?
Yeah, so you have a note here in the script, vegetation cycle?
Yeah.
Is this something you've been writing lately?
The vegetation cycle? It's very locale, right? But as we'll see, again, none more clearly than in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, Persephone's going to the underworld when she does that, her mother, Demeter, the goddess of grain, she mourns. And when the goddess of grain mourns, the earth shrivels and dies. You get fall, you get winter. And then when her daughter comes back, she rejoices. You get the blooming of spring and summer.
Right.
And so the shriveling and death, quote unquote, of the earth mirrors the death of the goddess, and the same thing with the resurrection.
So in myth interpretation terms, this would be an etiology.
Yes.
Right. This would be an explanation. Now, I don't accept the etiological explanation for myths myself. I'm skeptical of that because I don't think they are. They have enough explanatory power.
I don't think the ancients themselves clung to them that way.
Well, that's why I think it's not a valid way to understand it.
Okay, yeah.
So we won't digress too far, but the etiological explanation is ancient peoples were primitive.
Yes.
They didn't understand how things worked.
Right,
so they made up these stories, right? Death and rebirth, I don't understand that. Must be a goddess involved.
Right.
It's a little too simplistic.
Right, exactly right. So, I can't imagine, September, October rolling around in Athens, it's getting a little chilly, and say, oh, well, Persephone must be descending.
No.
Right, in this kind of literal kind of sense.
No, I don't think they were that simplistic.
No, I don't either, right. So, but I think that's a reflective of our own times. I think we can default to the literal.
Correct.
In a way that I think does not mesh with how kind of the ancients understood and saw their world.
No, and of course, to add to that, our belief that technological sophistication equals greater understanding.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Which it doesn't.
No.
But before we talk about Demeter, we have to talk about the genre of the Homeric hymns a little bit. Isn't that right?
Yes. So the Homeric hymns is this collection of 33 anonymous poems, these hymns, written to various deities. Sometimes they double up. Most of them are very, very short. And they are called the Homeric hymns. I've read a few things that some have argued that because they were written in the dactylic hexameter, the same meter as the Iliad and the Odyssey, that many early readers assumed that they were from Homer. I don't know if that's true or not. But they
you don't know if it's true that was the assumption.
Yes, right. But because they're written in the same meter and they kind of maybe have kind of that Iliadic, Odyssean feel to them.
Well, they're dealing with deities, right?
And so they were. There may have been a kind of an early understanding that, or assumption that they were actually Homeric.
Correct.
But they're not.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's these short poems, and each of them are dedicated to one god or a goddess, and they're very interesting reads. And the Homeric hymn to Demeter is the third longest of them.
Yeah, 495 lines.
Yeah, so it's a sizable poem. Only the hymns to Apollo and Hermes are longer.
Right. So it's what we would call technically an eypllion, right?
Yes.
A mini epic.
A mini epic. Yeah. Exactly.
Now at this point, the listener is getting a little bit nervous.
Oh, are they?
Well, yes,
About
because
what?
we just finished the 12 books of the Aeneid. And they're going, no, don't start over.
Oh, no. Another year?
Eypllion, 495 lines. What are they going to do with this hymn to Demeter?
Right.
But, I remember when I first encountered these in grad school, it was in our rapid readings course with Jack Holtzmark of Tarzan fame.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So we read, I think, four or six books of the Iliad. Then we read 4 or 6 books of the Odyssey. And then he said, we got to read some Homeric hymns after we read Hesiod, Works and Days.
Yeah.
And in the Loeb edition, the old Loeb edition, 1920, I think, Hugh Evelyn White, the Homeric hymns and the Hesiodic poems are put together.
Oh, really?
For convenience sake, and also because by common consent or common consensus, Hesiod is a slightly younger contemporary of Homer, and the Homeric hymns have that archaic stamp,
right?
Even though they were not written by Homer, whoever he was, or Hesiod.
Right. Oh, that's really interesting. I think the general kind of scholarly consensus is that most of these poems were written in the 7th century. So
between 699 and 600.
Yeah. So on the heels of Hesiod, perhaps.
Right.
So yeah, that's really
not a bad place to be.
No,
on the heels of Hesiod.
Yeah.
But Jeff, you've already made the point that these hymns are of different length, right? So can you give us kind of an idea of how much variety is there, and why does the poem to Demeter stand out?
Yeah, so most of them, if you were to, I'm not going to read through the list,
all the statistics,
right? But most of them are very short.
Okay,
5 lines, 7 lines, 13 lines, 18 lines seems to be the norm,
right? I see this one to Artemis is 9 lines.
Yes, right. Aphrodite actually gets 3 Homeric hymns. One is 293 lines. The next one is 21 lines, and the last one is 6 lines. And so they're kind of all over the place in terms of their length. And so the fact that the hymn to Demeter is 495 lines really makes it stand out.
That's a whopper.
Yep.
And did you read anything in the scholarship about why this might be? Is the idea that some of the longer poems were lost? Or is Demeter special, and that's why this one is longer?
I don't know. That's a really good question, right? My personal favorite of them is the Homeric hymn to Hermes,
where he steals the cattle.
It's so much fun.
It's funny, isn't it?
It's funny. Yeah.
He steals Apollo's cattle and creeps back into the cradle. And I'm an innocent child. What could I have
exactly.
done?
He pulls up his blankie and he's like, "Who, me?"
Right.
It's great.
And Apollo, can't really bring the hammer down on him. He's just a baby.
He's too cute.
So Zeus intervenes and resolves the dispute.
Right.
It's pretty funny.
It is. But if you compare the tone of the Hermes hymn and the Demeter hymn, they're so radically different. Right. It would be hard for me to read the Homeric hymn to Hermes and say, "Oh, this is clearly setting the template for how one should worship Hermes."
No,
it's setting the tone for a kind of a
sitcom.
A sitcom, exactly, exactly right. But the Homeric hymn to Demeter is so different.
Yeah.
And so not only are the hymns radically different in terms of their length, but the tone is all over the map too.
Yeah, I'd like to read a little bit of a quote here from a book called, we've referenced it before, A Handbook of Greek Literature by one H.J. Rose. Mm-hmm. One of the great virtues of this book is that it's in the public domain. Another great virtue is that it's comprehensive. So, people might say the scholarship in there is a little bit dated. Okay, fine. A few things have changed since 1934, but a lot of it's very accurate.
Right.
So,
and I see that copy you're holding. Is that your own personal copy?
I was just going to mention, yes, it is.
It looks very well worn.
And guess whose name is inscribed on the inside? One Robert J. Otten.
No way.
Yeah. Yes. No, you never had him as a professor, and neither did I. This is the late Bob Otten, who was a professor of classics at Calvin University.
That's right. That's right.
Yep. So
you stole it from him?
No, I inherited the copy. Maybe he gave it to Rich Weavers, and I got it
made
from
it
him.
way to you. That's
yeah,
great.
It's sweet to have the books of those who've gone before. So,
indeed.
So this is from page 53, and the chapter is on Homer and the ancient epic. And Rose says, quote, "The hymn to Demeter is one of the best, a little epic in itself, dealing in 495 really poetical and eloquent lines with the story of Demeter's sorrows, how Persephone was carried off by Hades and searched for by her mother, who in her wanderings came to Eleusis and after the restoration of her daughter inaugurated her mysteries there. Since Athens is not mentioned in this connection, Eleusis must have been independent when the hymn was written. It seems to have been annexed sometime in the 6th century. That is, that Eleusis was annexed by Athens and became part of its, suzerainty, something like that. Mm-hmm. Therefore, a 7th century date, as you were saying, is consistent with this piece of evidence, so sometime between 699 and 600, and not contradicted by anything else in the poem.
Yes. That's really interesting. I'm glad you read that,
right?
Because when we get to the episodes talking about how was the ritual celebrated, Athens plays a huge part.
Right,
it starts in Athens and it ends in Athens.
Right,
and
so it's a little bit of an argument from silence, we should say.
That is true.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I often do that, and that is, Athens isn't mentioned in the hymn to Demeter, and because we know when Athens annexed Eleusis, it would be natural to assume that they would have inserted something about Athens,
right?
At the time the poem was taken over. But
I think that's a fair assumption.
I think so too. Yeah. I think so too. If we find some analog, right? If the state of Michigan decided to annex Chicago, right, 4 million people, the third largest city or something like that in the United States, the state of Michigan would probably mention in a celebratory poem that, hey, we own Chicago,
right.
with the Cubs.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I think too that these arguments that there were things that we know in the ritual that aren't mentioned in the poems. Was the poem how connected was the poem to the ritual? Well, I mean, these things aren't static; these things grow over time. And so as Athens kind of takes over, the ownership of the cult. Yeah, other things bleed in. It takes on a different flavor.
Exactly. So speaking of other things bleeding in,
yes,
and taking on a different flavor,
yes,
it's time for the ads.
Let's do it. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Ratio Coffee. Ratio Coffee, apparently the hit at Latin colloquiums across the fruited plain.
Yes, very popular.
Very popular. Yeah.
It was actually hard to to pull people away from the machine. Come on, we got to study some Latin.
They were kind of gathered around it.
We want to watch and hushed tones.
Exactly. And the coffee maker was kind of giving off this unearthly glow.
Yes. Right? Like it had been initiated into a mystery cult.
Exactly. Right. So Dave, I love my ratio.
I know you do.
Machine. Yep.
You've got your own hulking flagon now with the 8. You've got the 6 sitting on the shelf. It's not going anywhere. You didn't have the grace to regift it to some poor extended family member who's drinking, I don't know, pirate boat swill.
Right. Yeah. That day will come.
Okay.
It will find a home. But just before I left here to meet you in the bunker, I filled the tank up with water.
Nice.
I got the my new metal.
Did you get a metal cone?
Oh, it's changed everything.
Game changer, isn't it?
It is. Right?
Enough throwing away those paper things.
Exactly. And then again, the hulking flagon, which just keeps the coffee hot for hours.
Did you brew up some this morning for Mrs. Winkle?
Of course. Yep.
All right.
I brew up a cup. I brought it up to her as she was kind of reading up in bed. Oh man, it's a great way to start the day.
It is a good way to start the day.
Yeah.
And so in my travels, I was drinking from, I don't know how to, Guric, the Guric.
Yes.
Guric. There may be some consonants switched there.
Are you mean Curie?
No, I wasn't going to say that. We're protecting ourselves against lawsuits.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So ignore what I just said.
Yeah,
right.
The little cups where you stick it in the top and you pull the lever down. And,
right.
I mean, it's passable.
Yeah.
I survived in one piece, but where was my ratio?
Exactly right. And those things where you just get the one cup at a time, you have to kind of go back and do it all over again. No.
Very labor intensive.
Very labor intensive. You won't find that with the ratio 8 or the 6.
You want just a one button push.
One button push that takes you through the bloom, through the brew, and the ready. That's it.
Correct.
Yep.
So while I was teaching in Kansas, we were talking about something in the Greek class, and I think it was Ben. I think it was this young man, Ben, fine Greek student. We're working along, and I said, okay, so we're doing pretty well. I think you folks are a little rusty. It's early in the day, maybe a little tired. And Ben said, hey, we're in the bloom stage.
Not bad.
That's pretty good.
That is pretty good. Right?
Yeah.
Did you give him his props in the moment, or did you hold back?
No, I gave him his props.
Okay, well,
I've grown in that.
All right.
In that regard, you know
serious.
me pretty well, don't you?
I do.
All right. But if someone would like to score their own coffee machine, Jeff,
yes,
what should they do?
They should go to ratiocoffee.com, RATIO coffee.com. Find the machine that you want, the 8 or the 6. Type in the coupon code. Dave, what's our coupon code for this?
So it's the July code still.
Even though we are in August.
We are in August.
But this code will work.
It'll work. So AN,
yes,
ad nauseum, CO, coffee, the number 6, as in 2 times 3, and the letter B as in
bloom
or brackish.
Brackish.
Yeah, yes, beautiful.
Beautiful.
Should we say it again?
Yes. ANCO6B.
Yes, check it out.
So, and if you get that, if you put that in your in the box,
yes,
that will get you 15% off your entire.
That's correct. You don't want to miss out on this. This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by the good folks at Hackett Publishing. Hackett has been in business for 52 years now, I believe.
As long as I've been on this earth.
Yes, and they have produced some fantastic volumes. If you want to read about the Homeric world, you want to read translations of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. In my travels again, I have met folks who are taking advantage of this coupon. I just got an email this week. Someone said, hey, I'm interested in brushing up on some Augustine. Should I check out the... I think it's the Selected Augustine Reader from Hackett. It's an excellent volume.
Yeah.
And these folks have been with us from the very beginning, providing us with so much support for the classics in general.
Yep.
Jeff, you're going to say that you like the covers.
Of course I like the covers, right?
What else do you like?
I like how affordable these volumes are. I teach a student population that many of the kids, they don't have a lot of extra money. And so, buying textbooks is a burden. And I know that for my class...
They're not putting books on daddy's credit card necessarily.
No, not at all.
Right.
And so when I can offer them an excellent erudite text from Hackett, and it's going to cost them, maybe $8 to get Stanley Lombardo's translation of the Odyssey.
Can't beat it.
You can't beat it.
No.
And so, and I like them on my own shelves as well.
Right.
It's just great stuff.
Would you say the selection is narrow or broad?
Very broad.
Would you say it's shallow or deep?
I would say it's very deep.
Would you say it's expensive or hits the sweet spot of affordability?
I would say choice B.
Okay.
Right there. Right. So listeners, go do yourself a favor. Go to hackettpublishing.com. That's HACKETT publishing.com. Find the books that you want. Drop them in your little grocery satchel and type in this coupon code AN2023. So that's AN ad nauseam plus the current year. And Dave, that will get them
20% off their order and
free shipping.
Free shipping. Check it out. Okay, Jeff, so as we get back into the hymn to Demeter, you're going to tell us a little bit about who she was.
Yeah, I don't want to go on at length here, but for our listeners who, for maybe this is brand new, Demeter was an earth mother goddess. In some ways,
the mater part means mother,
right? That's what I think that's a safe assumption to make. And she kind of takes over the earth goddess qualities that Hera, I think, kind of loses along the way. All right, so Zeus and Hera together, sky god and earth goddess, that kind of that heros gamos, that classic pairing you find in many traditions around the world. Hera kind of loses her association with the earth, and then that hole is kind of plugged by Demeter.
Hera takes on maternity and
childbirth,
childbearing, other kinds of things. But Demeter is a doublet of Gaia, right?
Right.
The earth herself, but I don't think Gaia is ever anthropomorphized.
No.
Right? Whereas Demeter is a full-grown woman. She appears in human form all the time.
Yes.
And she's an Olympian, am I right?
She is a first-generation Olympian. So she's a daughter of Rhea and Kronos, and so that makes her a sister to Zeus and Hera and Poseidon and Hades. And the fact that she's a sister to Hades in this story just adds a kind of a layer of weird, maybe that the ancients wouldn't have paid attention to. But if you look at the family tree, it's tangled.
It is. Well, she has an affair with Zeus at one point. I don't remember who the progeny was.
Yeah, right.
But there's a lot of craziness going on.
Yes. But let's get into it. Dave, will you start by reading the first few lines of this poem in Greek?
I would love to. So this is in dactylic hexameter, and I am using the Loeb edition that I mentioned previously, and they go something like this, the first 5 lines. Demetre ukomon semnen theon arkoma eiden, autein ed thugatrata nous furon, hein I deo neos. Herpaxen doken debaruk tupos eurdruopa zeus. Nosfin de metros crusa a oru agla o carpu. And finally, paisusan ku re sisun okeanu bathu kolpois.
Very nicely done.
Thank you.
Right.
It's a little more challenging than some of the Latin hexameters that we've read.
Indeed. Right. But our listeners, who listen to our Iliad and Odyssey episode might recognize or our Aeneid episodes, that dum diddy dum kind of rhythm.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it's a marching, rapid, stately at times.
Right. So I'll give a translation. This translation comes from Gregory Nagy, classicist from Harvard.
Yes, famous guy.
Yep. I don't know if he's still teaching, but
I don't know.
He's been around forever. And listeners, if you look at the Harvard Classics webpage, you can find this translation there for free. But Nagy translates thusly: I begin to sing of Demeter, the holy goddess with the beautiful hair, and her daughter, too, the one with the delicate ankles whom Hades seized. She was given away by Zeus, the loud thunderer, the one who sees far and wide. Demeter did not take part in this, she of the golden double axe, she who glories in the harvest. She, that is Persephone, was having a good time along with the daughters of Okeanos, the daughters of Ocean, who wear their waistbands slung low.
They wear their waistbands slung low?
This just struck me funny because it comes up...
It's like yoga pants?
At least like 4 times in this poem about the ladies who wear their waistbands slung low.
Well, of what is this a translation? Let me see. They wear their waistbands. This is bathu kolpois.
Yes.
That's what it is, bathu kolpois. Deep, low in front, kind of.
Low in front, right?
I'm not sure.
Was this some kind of fashion statement?
Yeah, I think maybe it's because they're down by the ocean and they're cavorting and sporting in the waves.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe there may be somewhat of a sexual connotation that it's supposed to be alluring. They're, scantily clad. I'm not sure.
It's it shows up a couple of times later associated with I think Persephone herself. So I not exactly know kind of why this shows up. It just kind of struck me probably unintentionally funny.
Yeah.
That these low slinging waistbands.
Well, I would say that when it comes to things striking you unintentionally funny, you have a pretty light trigger there.
Okay, that's okay. Fair enough.
But so do I. We could go back to the tomatoes.
Right, exactly. Right. So,
what do we make of this, Jeff?
This is in terms of archetypal stories. This is a very common one where a young maiden kind of wanders away from civilization And she's usually doing something kind of innocent and carefree.
Like Europa with the bull, right?
Right. Or even, it makes me think of Little Red Riding Hood.
Yes.
She's going to Grandma's house to bring her some, a pot of butter.
Right.
And she wanders through the woods and she encounters the big bad wolf.
Pot of butter?
But that's the version that...
Really?
Yeah, she's bringing her... Grandma's sick, so what do you bring sick people? Pot of butter.
I'd never heard that. First of all, who carries... butter in pots?
Well, it's a crock.
Country crock.
A country crock, right? With a little handle. Right, exactly. But there's lots of stories in folktales and myths around the world.
And then something violent and terrifying swoops into this locus amoenus and causes havoc.
Right. And a common interpretation of these stories is that these stories involving these kind of young, innocent, often virginal women is that it's kind of a cautionary tale about their purity. Right?
Yeah, don't do that.
And the monster, represents a violation of that.
Yeah.
And so this is a similar kind of thing. And so she's out gathering flowers. In the poem, we learned that she plucks the narcissus flower.
Mm-hmm. She's with her entourage.
And that's often how these stories go. They're with friends who witness this. The earth opens up, and out of the crack in the earth comes up Hades in his dread chariot, grabs Persephone and drags her down into the underworld to kind of force her to be his bride, kind of caveman style.
Yeah, I have to say this is, to me, though I'm not a young maiden and never have been, obviously, perhaps the most frightening story in classical myth.
It's terrifying.
Because of the being buried alive idea.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's not just what, Hades intends to do, but the suddenness and finality of being pulled down below the earth.
Right.
That's what's frightening.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a very famous statue group by Bernini.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
And the Borghese Galleria.
Yeah.
Equally frightening with its pneumatic technique.
It is, right. It's very similar to the Apollo Daphne, but in some ways I find that
much worse.
It's much worse. And it kind of has that twisting effect. You can walk around the statue and Persephone or Proserpina's body is twisted as she's trying to get away from it, and the tears coming from her face, and kind of that maniacal laugh on the face of Hades.
Yeah, with her hand on his face, if I'm remembering correctly.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, there's
kind
incredible.
of a fighting chance for Daphne, right?
Yeah,
and it's a more refined statue in some ways. Also Bernini, and in the same, if I'm not mistaken, it's in the same museum.
It's in,
isn't it in the Borghese?
Borghese, yeah.
Both of them are there.
Both of them, yep.
I think there are 4 Berninis there, if I'm not mistaken. We're getting off track, but
right.
I think his David and Goliath is in there, and maybe the Aeneas and Anchises.
Yeah.
But it's
incredible. The way that I remember about that statue, Hades, the way his hands kind of press into her flesh.
So that's called the pneumatic technique I referenced earlier. It looks as though, the marble is pudgy. It's inflated. It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
But there's also a very famous, one of the rare Greek paintings at Pella, remember? Near the tomb of Alexander.
Remind me.
Not Alexander, but Philip II in Pella.
I'm not remembering this.
This is of Hades in the chariot abducting Persephone.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
You've seen that, haven't you?
I'm sure I have. I'm just not remembering it.
Yeah. Well, it's in Pella or Vergina. I can't remember. Maybe it's in Vergina, but all in that region of Macedonia, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure you've seen it, but also equally frightening.
Yeah.
So down she goes, and what happens next?
Down she goes. Her cries kind of echo throughout the world. The author tells us that Hecate and Helios hear the cries, but
Hecate, the witch goddess,
yes,
and Helios, the sun,
but they're both hesitate to do anything about it because they know or they learn that Zeus has given his stamp of approval. Has said to his brother, "You can do this," and so when Zeus says something's going to happen, you're not going to step on his toes, and so it becomes that much more brutal for Demeter is that people know about this, but they won't step up to help.
Well, I mentioned earlier that Zeus and Demeter, right, brother and sister, had an affair, right? And I said I couldn't remember who their progeny was.
Yes.
Well, this is, face palm, I think they call that.
Right.
So go ahead, Jeff.
It's Persephone.
Right.
Yes. So it's Zeus's own daughter that's being abducted by his brother.
Whose abduction Zeus endorses and permits and allows? It's terrible.
Yes. Right. So as the story goes on, Demeter hears her daughter's cries echoing off the mountains. And here I'm going to pick up with more of Professor Naj's translation, which goes, "And the lady mother Demeter heard her, and a sharp achos seized her heart." A pain.
Yes.
Yes. The headband on her hair she tore off with her own immortal hands and threw a dark cloak over her shoulders. She sped off like a bird soaring over land and sea, looking and looking, but no one was willing to tell her the truth. Not one of the gods, not one of the mortal humans, not one of the birds, messengers of the truth. Thereafter, for 9 days did the lady Demeter wander all over the earth, holding torches ablaze in her hands. Not once did she take of ambrosia and nectar sweet to drink in her grief, nor did she bathe her skin in water.
So what are the torches for? Are they used to search for her, or are they symbols of mourning?
I think they're both. It's a very layered symbol. This is one of these things that scholars of the mysteries argue that may have been reenacted. That, as the initiates kind of go through this, one of the things that they're also doing, they're also looking for Persephone.
Right, so they would carry torches.
In a nighttime ritual, right?
Couldn't they just shake their iPhone and turn the flashlight on automatically?
Can you, how unimpressive would a modern version of this? Just kind of tap the little flashlight, where are you? Right? They'd locate her by GPS and it would be over in a minute.
Right.
Right.
Thankfully, these stories were from a more, primitive time, simple time.
A simple time.
In terms of technology.
Right. But I think also the carrying of the torches, Hecate is also a goddess who's often depicted with torches as well. So
right.
That she lights your way through the underworld, because it's kind of searching through the darkness of death for the daughter that you've lost to death.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the 9 days, that becomes, I think, clearly kind of programmatic for the later celebration of the mysteries, is that the greater mysteries, as we'll learn later, there were 2 stages of the mysteries. The lesser mysteries took place in March, and the greater mysteries took place in September.
In the fall.
Right. Right around the equinox, when Persephone would be allegorically descending.
Mm-hmm.
And those greater mysteries lasted for a total of 9 days. And so the assumption is, which I think is a fair one, is that that's because that's how long that Demeter searched for her daughter before winding up at Eleusis herself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there was, as we'll discuss later, a long procession from the city of Athens all the way to Eleusis for the celebration of the greater mysteries, correct? In the fall.
That's what kind of capped off. That was that was the moment that kind of capped off the main part of the mysteries.
Right.
Yep.
Well, Jeff, we're getting up against it a little bit.
We are.
And this seems like a pretty natural place to break off.
Yes.
And in anticipation of part 2.
Yeah.
So what should we say about this now in terms of where we're headed?
So we'll pick it up next time. So Demeter herself, she, as we'll learn, she disguises herself as an old woman, and she actually comes to rest in the small town of Eleusis. And that's where the story really starts to heat up. And we start to kind of understand why that tiny little town, 14 miles up the coast from Athens, becomes so important in this story.
We're going to be introduced to some other characters, right?
Yes.
The king and Demophoon, and there's some nighttime lactation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, there are. Yeah, there's all kinds of things going on. The queen, matinee, the daughters.
Right.
There's a figure who tells jokes and gets Demeter to laugh for the first time. And so
does he have a tomato bit?
She needs a tomato bit. Yeah, definitely. Right. I don't know if the tomato bit would have. Well, she's a goddess of agriculture. She would have loved the tomato.
She'd have gone for that.
Oh, man. That would have been huge. Yeah, exactly. But we are up against the clock. We got to get out of here. But before we do, Dave, tell us a little bit about the Moss method in LPSI, would you?
Yeah, sure. So when I was out in Kansas, I was promoting the Moss method. They're using it in schools now.
Fantastic.
And the book is fantastic. It's a great book. 19th century Charles Melville Moss put together these really interesting stories. And I've just been, standing on his shoulders, and I built a program around it. So you've got module 1 with 40 lessons, whiteboard explanations of the grammar in great detail. But in order to get started reading the stories, you only have to know the first declension of the noun. So that's 8 forms and 6 verb forms. And then you just start reading, right?
Yeah.
So no memorizing lots of grammar before you start. You learn it along the way.
You hit the ground running.
That's right. It's a lot of fun. And there's a great quote at the beginning of the Moss book where Moss says words to the effect of, Greek should be a matter of the intuition and the brain. It shouldn't be an exercise in flipping through a lexicon.
Yeah.
And I really like that. He's trying to get you to appreciate and understand the language. So if you're interested in studying Greek with me, go to mossmethod.com. Please check out the program. I have a new episode dropping, as they say, something from 2 Corinthians, a little tiny free Greek lesson coming out pretty soon when Mishka, gets that done. You can check out that and all the other free material. And if you like the course, sign up and join me for office hours each week.
Fantastic. And what about LPSI?
Yeah, so I got a Latin program too, and it's newer. It's not as old as Moss, hasn't been going as long. But latinperdiem.com/LLPSI. Hans Orberg wrote the great Familia Romana, the Lingua Latina per se illustrata. And you can take this course. Like Moss, it's self-paced, expert, and accessible. It begins ab initio from the ground up. It's a great value. I like to say about my programs, there may be better teaching out there. It would be immodest for me to claim otherwise. But I think this is really the best value, the combination of expertise and affordability.
Fantastic. And like the Moss method, this too also kind of gets you reading Latin right away, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Roma in Italia est. That's how it starts out. Anybody can do that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of nice sometimes when you're in a class, as in this one, to watch other people learn.
Yeah.
So it's much less pressure.
Right.
We've got 4, studio audience members kind of. I'm teaching them, and you can watch as they learn.
That sounds great. All right, Dave. Also, before we go, big thanks to Mishka, our intrepid engineer who puts this all together so nicely and makes us sound so good.
And not only that, but when Mishka first started working for me with some of the other projects, there was no mention of a podcast. You know what she was going to do in the beginning?
What was that?
Data entry.
Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, man.
And I said, well, Mishka, can you do some other stuff? Well, I'll give it a try. How about the audio and video production? I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
And I mean, she's...
Boom. She can do it all.
Fantastic.
Also, thanks to Scott Van Zen and Ken Tamplin for the great music you hear throughout the
Some
the
roaring riffs there. Really nice stuff. The bumper music for the commercials and the guitar intro and outro. It's great stuff.
Good stuff. And hey, if you wanna drop a note, if you want a shout out like Tyler got in this episode, drop us a note. You can write to Dave at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V.
Or Jeff at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V. We've got some good correspondence recently. We're going to reply to that. Don't worry.
Yes.
You're not forgotten. Mm-hmm. And we have a couple of shout outs in the pipeline, I think. We'd love to have more.
Fantastic. Yes. And next week, we're going to pick it up where we left off, and we're going to continue looking at this wonderful, enigmatic, and mysterious hymn.
Right.
Yep.
The Homeric hymn to Demeter. Now, Jeff, this is where you usually say...
Yeah. I believe you have the gustatory parting shot?
I do,
yes.
But we're not going to cue the music right at the end of this because we have a special send-off.
Oh, we do?
Yeah, so a young fan, a young man whom I met this week, a charming young individual, a voracious reader of the classics, and he loves this podcast. It was so thrilling to hear about how much he is enjoying this young man. And he wanted to meet Dr. Winkle. I said, well, I don't know if we can do that. We only bring him out on special occasions.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
But I had him record a little bit of a valediction, which is going to come here at the end.
Excellent.
So we're going to hear from him, from Jonathan. The gustatory parting shot is from one P.J. O'Rourke. And I like this a lot. Fish is the only food that is considered spoiled once it smells like what it is.
That's so true.
So people say, hey, that smells like fish.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Hi, this is Jonathan from Pennsylvania. Thank you for listening to the Ad Nauseam podcast.